All right, it is time to read the interlopers. An interloper is somebody who interlopes or gets in the middle of things. So if you have two people that are, having a fight, it kind of breaks it up. Although it's not a mediator, it's not someone who mediates or kind of makes peace with the two people that are fighting. It's it just gets in between. It interlopes. It just goes right through the middle of something. So it's always good to know about titles. Good to think about them for a second. I don't think there's any background information this time to read about. Yeah, but there will be some information in the notes. I think I mentioned this last time. If you see a one, then look for the vocab word or a number rather. All right, let's get to it. In a forest of mixed growth somewhere on the eastern spurs of the Carpathians, this is a mountain range that starts in Slovakia and extends through Poland, Ukraine, and Romania. So that gives us a sense of the, uh, you know, setting. Uh, a man stood one winter night watching and listening, as though he waited for some beast of the woods to come within range of his vision and later of his rifle. But the game for whose presence he kept so keen an outlook was none that figured in the sportsman's calendar as lawful and proper for the chase. Ulrich von Grotzwitz patrolled the dark forest in quest of a human enemy. Oh, it's one of these again. Didn't we just read the sniper, Mr. Kramer? The name also kind of gives us a sense of, the setting, right? The forest lands of the Grotzwitz were of wide extent and well stocked with game. The narrow strip of precipitous woodland that lay on its outskirt was not remarkable for the game it harbored or the shooting it afforded, but it was the most jealously guarded of all its owner's territorial possessions. A famous lawsuit in the days of his grandfather had wrested it from the illegal possession of a neighboring family of petty landowners. The dispossessed party had never acquiesced in the judgment of the courts, and a long series of poaching affrays and similar scandals had embittered the relationships between the families for 3 generations. The neighbor feud had grown into a personal one since Ulrich had come to be the head of his family. If there was a man in the world whom he detested and wished ill to, it was Georg Zeinam, the inheritor of the quarrel and the tireless game snatcher and raider of the disputed border forest. The feud perhaps might perhaps have died down or been compromised if the personal ill will of the two men had not stood in the way. As boys, they had thirsted for one another's blood. As men, they each prayed that misfortune might fall on the other. And this wind-scourged winter night, Ulrich had banded together his foresters to watch the dark forest, not in quest for four-footed quarry, but to keep a lookout for the prowling thieves whom he suspected of being afoot from across the land boundary. Sorry. Okay, it's a mouthful. So let's back up a second. First of all, they have their weapons out. They're looking for human prey, and this is happening in a forest. This particular piece of forest is heavily guarded. Why? Because it is a forest that this man's neighbors like to poach in. Poaching is illegally hunting. Like you have to have a license. You have to, certain places you can hunt, some certain places you can't, like national forests or whatever. There's certain times that you can hunt. There's a certain amount of animals you can hunt, and so they're hunting illegally, specifically because this is private property and he's not allowed to hunt on it. Why? Well, because the other people own it. But more importantly, uh, this had all been put to rest, right? There's a lawsuit. They sued that family and for poaching, and the court said, yeah, they can't poach in your land. They can't hunt there. But the Zeinam family, whom Georg is now the leader of, said, no, we're not. I don't care what the court says. We're going to keep hunting on this. And so because the one family keeps poaching on the other family's land, the other family hates them, and the other family hates them, so they hate each other, right? Like, hey, get off my land! You get out! It's not your land, you know. Um, and this has been going on for 3 generations. So if you go back 3 generations, like your grandparents started the fight, and now you're in charge of, the household. And so you've been taught to hate these people since you were a kid. Okay. Uh, and then it gets into the setting here. The roebuck, which is a male deer, small deer that live in Europe and Asia. The roebuck, which usually kept in the sheltered hollows during the storm wind, were running like driven things tonight. And there was movement and unrest among the creatures that were wont to sleep through the dark hours. Assuredly, there was a disturbing element in the forest, and Ulrich could guess from the quarter from whence it came. So we need to talk about the setting for a second. Uh, it's the wind is wild, and so you have this constant movement. When the wind's wild in the forest, that means the trees are constantly moving, and there's constantly sound, and it's pitch black. Um, it's just creepy. If that stuff's going on all the time, you can't see. It feels like there's stuff moving. You can't know if there's anyone creeping up behind you. Uh, it's a disturbing. It's very chaotic and creepy, right? Um, and the animals seem to be coming from a particular direction, and so that might mean that there's humans in that direction, right? That are coming towards. So Ulrich is like, oh, well, they all seem to be going that way. So I'm going towards that way. Okay, see if I can find the guy. He strayed away by himself from the watchers whom he had placed in ambush on the crest of a hill, and wandered far down the steep slopes amid the wild tangle of undergrowth, peering through the tree trunks and listening through the whistling and skirling of the wind and the restless beating of branches for sight and sound of the marauders. If only on this wild night in this dark, lone spot he might come across Georg Zeinam, man to man with none to witness. That was the wish that was uppermost in his thoughts. And as he stepped around the trunk of a huge beech, he came face to face with the man he sought. Well, that's very abrupt. It's like, man, if I could just see my enemy. Wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow, wow. And there he is. In fact, it's so sudden and so like unexpected. Where it's like, oh, and it's just there, right? And he's so lost in thought of wanting to kill him that he can't react quick enough. If you kind of see him coming, then it's like, oh, okay, here we go. But it's like, boom, and you kind of freeze, right? And I don't mean you, but that's what happens to a lot of people. The two enemies stood glaring at one another. For a long silent moment, each had a rifle in his hand, and each had hate in his heart and murder uppermost in his mind. The chance had come to give full play to the passions of a lifetime, but a man who has been brought up under the code of restraining civilization cannot easily nerve himself to shoot down his neighbor in cold blood and without a word spoken except for an offense against his hearth and honor. It's not that easy to just go up and punch someone in the face or shoot someone, right? I mean, some people don't find that hard, but like, you ever see a fight start at school? Obviously not Marina, but like junior high. Oh, when I was in high school or junior high, I went to Springfield, and there were fights like every day at Car Park, right? It took a while for them to start because the two people were kind of like, "Oh yeah, huh, what?" And it wouldn't. The only way they would start is if someone went up behind them and pushed one to the other, and then they bumped, and then boom, it was on. But to get these things started, even if you're like going to shoot the person, especially if you're caught off guard, like someone's got to make the first move. So they just stare at each other. They're just, if they start insulting, they're like, "Oh yeah, what'd you call my mom?" And then, but it's silent. And before the moment of hesitation had given way to action, A deed of nature's own violence overwhelmed them both. A fierce shriek of the storm had been answered by a splitting crash over their heads. And ere, which means before, they could leap aside, a mass of falling beech tree had thundered down on them. Ulrich von Grotzwitz found himself stretched on the ground, one arm numb beneath him, and the other held almost helplessly in a tight tangle of forked branches, while both legs were pinned beneath the fallen mass. His heavy shooting boots had saved his feet from being crushed to pieces. But if his fractures were not as seriously as they might have been, at least it was evident that he could not move from his present position until someone came to release him. The descending twigs had slashed the skin of his face, and he had to wink away some drops of blood from his eyelashes before he could take in the general view of the scene. Of the disaster. At his side, so near that under ordinary circumstances he could have almost touched him, lay Georg Zainab, alive and struggling, but obviously as helplessly pinioned down as himself. All around them lay a thick strewn wreckage of splintered branches and broken twigs. Relief at being alive and exasperation at his captive plight brought a strange medley of pious thank offerings and sharp curses to Ulrich's lips. Georg, who was nearly blinded with the blood which trickled across his eyes, stopped his struggling for a moment to listen, and then gave a short, snarling laugh. "Ha, ha, ha, ha. So, you're not killed as you ought to be, but you're caught anyway. Caught fast. Oh, what a jest! Ulrich von Grotzwitz snared in the stolen forest. There's real justice for you. I'm caught in my own forest land, retorted Ulrich. When my men come to release us, you will wish, perhaps, that you were in better plight than caught poaching on a neighbor's land. Shame on you. Shame on you. Like, that's the bit. You're trying to murder this guy, and shame on you is the best insult you can come up with. Like, wow, that's rough. Oh. Georg was silent for a moment, and then he answered quietly. Are you sure that your men will find much to release? I have men too in the forest tonight, closely behind me, and they will be here first to do the releasing. When they drag me out from under these branches, it won't need much clumsiness on their part to roll this massive trunk right over on top of you. Your men will find you dead under a fallen beech tree. For form's sake, I shall send my condolences to your family. It is a useful hint, said Ulrich fiercely. That wasn't very fierce, but I'm going with a certain voice here. So, my men had orders to follow in 10 minutes' time, 7 of which have already gone by. And when they get me out, I will remember the hint. Only as you will have met your death poaching on my lands, I don't think I can decently send any message of condolence to your family. I mean, that's pretty good. Yeah, that's better. Good, snarled Georg. Good. We fight this quarrel out to the death. You and I and our foresters, with no cursed interlopers to come between us. Oh, they said the name of the story. And actually, there has been an interloper. It's the tree. It has interloped, is came between their feud. Death and damnation to you, Ulrich von Grotzwitz. Same to you, Georg Zainam, forest thief, game snatcher. All right. Both men spoke with the bitterness of possible defeat before them, for each knew that it might be a long time before his men would seek him out or find him. It was a bare matter of chance which party would arrive first on the scene. Both had now given up the useless struggle to free themselves from the mass of wood that held them down. Ulrich limited his endeavors to an effort to bring his one partially free arm near enough to his outer coat pocket to draw out his wine flask. Even when he had accomplished that operation, it was long before he could manage the unscrewing of the stopper or get out any of the liquid down his throat. But what a heaven-sent draught it seemed. It was open winter, and little snow had fallen as yet. Hence the captive suffered less from the cold than might have been the case at that season of the year. Nevertheless, the wine was warming and reviving to the wounded man. He looked across with something like a throb of pity to where his enemy lay, just keeping the groans of pain and weariness from crossing his lips. Could you reach the flask if I threw it over to you? Said Ulrich suddenly. There's good wine in it, and one may as well be comfortable as one can. Let us drink, even if tonight one of us dies. No, I can scarcely see anything. There's so much blood caked around my eyes. And in any case, I don't drink wine with an enemy. I mean, you know, the guy's offering you wine. Like, you have that much pride that you're not going to take some. Like, no, I don't take things from people I hate. So if he offered you $1,000,000, would you say no thanks? Right? Not that wine's worth $1,000,000, but you know. Ulrich was silent for a few minutes and lay listening to the wary screeching of the wind. He still had this mood that's very just violent, and you know it's constantly moving in the wind, and everything's rustling and shaking. And so it's very moody story if you imagine that in the background, and in the middle of the night too. Uh, an idea was slowly forming and growing in his brain, an idea that gained strength every time that he looked across at the man who was fighting so grimly past pain and exhaustion. In the pain and languor that Ulrich himself was feeling, the old fierce hatred seemed to be dying down. Neighbor, he said presently, do as you please if your men come first. It was a fair compact, but as for me, I've changed my mind. If my men are the first to come, you shall be the first to be helped, as though you were my guest. We have quarreled like devils all of our lives over this stupid strip of forest where the trees can't even stand upright in a breath of wind. Lying here tonight thinking, I've come to think we've been rather fools. There are better things in life than getting the better of a boundary dispute. Neighbor, if you will help me bury the old quarrel, I will ask you to be my friend. Well, okay, maybe he doesn't say it like that, but you know. Georg Zeinem was silent for so long that Ulrich thought that perhaps he had fainted with pain of his injuries. Maybe he just died. That'd be hilarious. No, that'd be terrible. Then he spoke slowly and in jerks. How the whole region would stare and gabble if we rode into the market square together. No one living can remember seeing a Zeinem and a von Grotzwitz talking to one another in friendship. And what peace there would be among the Forster folk if we ended our feud tonight. And if we choose to make peace among our people, there is none to interfere, no interlopers from outside. You would come and keep the Sylvester night beneath my roof, and I would come and feast some high day at your castle. I would never fire a shot on your land save when you invited me as a guest, and you should come and shoot with me down in the marshes where the wildfowl are. In all the countryside, there are none that can hinder if we will to make peace. I never thought to have wanted to do other than hate you all my life, but I think I've changed my mind about things too this last half an hour. And you offered me your wine flask. Ulrich von Grotzwitz, I will be your friend. I mean, okay, this might be a little exaggeration. For a space, okay, so let's pause for a second. First of all, so you have a complete reconciliation, right? These things are kind of tricky because, like, when I see this in movies, a lot of times I'm like, wait a second. You can't just go from like being mortal enemies to all of a sudden like we're buds, okay? There has to be enough rational reasoning for this to happen for it to be believable, right? Like yeah, that's important to me when I'm watching movies or I'm reading books. When like if you just flip it like that, I don't buy it, right? Unless you've set it up properly. And I think this story is set up mostly because of this situation. You have a situation where they almost died, and very well could, right? If they don't get help, if they have internal bleeding and that kind of stuff, blood caked all over their, like they could easily die. You also have a situation where these two have hated each other from afar for a very long time. And both of these things have completely flipped, right? On the one hand, now they're actually next to each other. So, when people totally disagree on things or hate each other or been taught to hate people, and then you just hang out with people. You just have relationships. You just, friendships. Even if it's just office, you see each other and you get to know them on a personal level. A lot of times you go, oh, all those things that I thought I hated about you, I don't understand why I was such a jerk. Like you're actually a pretty interesting, nice person, right? And a lot of times all it takes is just one kind gesture from someone to the other person. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't know why I hated you all this time. Yeah, I never knew you were a nice guy because we never hung out and talked about it. But the other thing that's really important, so that's okay, I can buy that. The other thing that's really important though is that they're in a life or death situation here. Uh, when someone is in a situation like that, this is not a common thing. Okay. When someone's in a situation where they might die, um, a lot of times there's trauma from that, right? And a lot of times, people seek out like therapy to kind of deal with the situation because if you talk about it with your friends, like they don't get it. That's why like Alcoholics Anonymous exists. Like friends can't understand what alcoholism is like. They're like, I don't get it, just don't drink. Like, well, no, that's not how it works. Your brain's different, right? So they want to hang out with people who are in the same situation as them. So in this situation, they're both on the verge of death and they both understand the pain and suffering that each one of them is going through right now. And so they can feel sorrow for the other person. They can feel empathy, which is, I understand how you feel because they're going through it too. So that also brings like a connection between them, right? So to me, this complete turnaround, although it's very quick, I mean, it's a very short story. I buy it. It makes sense to me. Like I don't think it just all of a sudden out of nowhere. And it didn't have, maybe it could have used a little more buildup, and a little more explanation, a little more what's going on in his mind. But given just the circumstances around them, I'll give him a pass. I'll be like, yeah, okay, I buy that. So that's my personal thing. That's something that we would have discussed in class. I would have asked a bunch of questions, and this conversation would have gone on for 10 minutes. But that's the basic gist of it. Okay. So, okay. For a space, both men were silent, turning over in their minds the wonderful changes that this dramatic reconciliation would bring about. In the cold, gloomy forest, with the wind tearing in fitful gusts through the naked branches and whistling around the tree trunks, they lay and waited for the help that would now bring release and succor to both parties. Food and warmth, like it would save them. Uh, each each prayed a private prayer that his men might be the first to arrive, so that he might be the first to show honorable attention to the enemy that had become his friend. Presently, as the wind dropped for a moment, Ulrich broke the silence. Let us shout for help in this lull. Our voices may carry a little way. They won't carry far through these trees and undergrowth, said Georg, but we can try together then. The two raised their voices in a prolonged hunting call. Together again. Oh, sorry. That's Ulrich. Sorry, I got my voice wrong. Together again. Ulrich, a few minutes later, said, after listening in vain for an answering hello. I heard something that time, I think, said Ulrich. I heard nothing but the pestilential wind, said Georg hoarsely. There was a silence for some minutes, then Ulrich gave a joyful cry. I can see figures coming through the wood. They're following in the way I came down the hillside. Both men raised their voices in a loud shout as they can muster. They can hear us. They've stopped. Now they see us. They're running down the hill towards us, cried Ulrich. How many of them are there? Asked Georg. I can't see distinctly, said Ulrich. 9 or 10. And they are yours, said Georg. I only had 7 out with me. They're making all the speed they can, brave lads, said Ulrich gladly. Are they your men? Asked Georg. Are they your men? He repeated impatiently as Ulrich did not answer. No, said Ulrich. Sorry, I wasn't doing my voice. Are they your men? No, said Ulrich with a laugh, the idiotic, chattering laugh of a man unstrung with hideous fear. Who are they? Who are they? Asked Georg quickly, straining his eyes to see what the other would gladly not have seen. Wolves. Dun dun dun. Okay, end of story. That's it. So not only do we have the tree as an interloper, but wolves are also an interloper. All right. Well, this time I tried something different. Also, I scrolled past this picture because if you look at it closely, I mean, you can barely see these pictures, but that's a wolf. I hate how the pictures like give away the end of the story. It's kind of it doesn't make sense. But anyway, this time I tried to just read through the story and just explain, give the cultural background and stuff that you might need. And then I'll let the play posit, instead of me asking questions, I'm going to let the play posit do all the questions. So I'm sure there's been a ton of questions already, hopefully. Um, but all right, and then in class we will, when you get back to class, we will, go over all the answers, make sure you understand everything that's going on. If you have any questions, you can email me, but I'd probably just ask me in class. So, all right. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next time.